Okay, I think 3 is a charm. So I tried to do this a couple minutes ago, and my son called from school, and I'll skip the story related to that. And then next, my husband called, so I had to answer that question. I turned off my phone. Hopefully there aren't going to be any emergencies in the next 10 minutes or so. So I wanted to do a Facebook Live broadcast about testing requirements under the Pennsylvania homeschool law. There were a lot of questions yesterday on the Pennsylvania homeschool support group about testing, and that's really, now's the time of year that people are kind of getting things together and are having questions about that. So I am going to answer the basic, first I'll cover just what the law requires and then try to answer the questions that were asked in the group yesterday. Jody Ferris, who also suggested that I do this, she asked me to compare and talk a little bit about each of the tests that are available. And I don't really have a lot of experience with different tests because I only used one and that worked well for us. So I reached out to somebody who probably has more experience and can talk about the different tests that you can choose from, and I'll get her on hopefully a Skype call in this software, which allowed me to do this logo and my name. I was just tooling around with it. We'll get her on, and then you'll be able to see the interview, and she can answer some questions. So that's that. I wanted to let you know that I'm going to be publishing these or broadcasting these from the PA Homeschool Law Facebook page because it's public. Then I'll share it to the Pennsylvania Homeschool Law Support Group, and hopefully you'll see it. I mean, I was mentioning before the second phone call that Facebook has changed the algorithm and it affects pages like this. So even if you like or follow the Pennsylvania PA Homeschool Law Facebook page, you won't necessarily get notified when I publish a broadcast or anything, any information. Facebook is just changing that a little bit. So I've been thinking about how best to let people know when I do one of these. So that's efficient and helpful, and you're not getting spammed or junk or whatever. So we'll see how this goes and how many people have access to it. I mean, you can always find it, but you might have to search, just kind of visit the page occasionally, and it'll get, these kind of things will get pushed down the page. But anyway, I'll figure that out and let you know what's going to go on. So today I'm just going to go over the basic requirements for testing and then sort of give you some just sort of myth busting, and hopefully it'll make you less intimidated by this testing process. All right, so I'm going to try to show, I always suggest going to the law first to see what it requires. And I'm going to, let me show my screen. So if you go to the Pennsylvania Homeschool Law website, you can see the text of the homeschool law there. Let me see if I can share my screen with you. So if you go to the PA Homeschool Law website and click resources, I'm going to share my screen. So if you click resources and law text, you can find the testing requirements under, let me hide this, the portfolio requirements. I don't know if you can see that little box. So scroll down, and under portfolio requirements, and most of you probably know this if you've read this before, but I just wanted to show you where you can find it. So it's in subsection E1, talks about what the portfolio has to include, and right here, and in grades 3, 5, and 8, results of nationally normed standardized achievement tests in reading, language arts, and mathematics, or the results of statewide tests administered in these grade levels. The department, which refers to the Pennsylvania Department of Education, shall establish a list with a minimum of 5 tests of nationally normed standardized tests from which the supervisor of the home education program shall select a test to be administered if the supervisor does not choose the statewide tests. At the discretion of the supervisor, the portfolio may include the results of nationally normed standardized achievement tests for other subject areas or grade levels, so other than reading, language arts, and math. The supervisor shall ensure that the nationally normed standardized tests or the statewide tests shall not be administered by the child's parent or guardian. Okay, so there is the law. And like I said, I'm sure most of you have read that. And so let's talk about it a little bit. So obviously, if you haven't read it before, most of you know that a parent can't administer the test. But it's fine if you choose a test that can be administered by somebody other than a person certified in that particular test. Some of the tests have to be administered by a person with a special certification or training in administering and scoring the particular test. I think, for example, the Iowa Basic maybe, or the Terra Nova. I'm not sure. That's why I want to get an expert on that. So anyway, as long as it's not a parent, you can have a sibling, a neighbor, a relative administer the test. The other option is if you choose an online version, the software is actually the proctor, so you don't have to find another person. So that's one thing that I wanted to make sure you knew. Also, testing isn't required for private tutor programs. That's just one of the benefits of filing under the private tutor option if you are a Pennsylvania certified teacher. And one of the questions was whether you can opt out, and you cannot opt out of this requirement. I know there is an opt-out provision for public school state required testing, but if that's not available for this homeschool requirement. Okay. So the list of approved tests can be found on the Pennsylvania Department of Education website. I guess the law requires that they list a minimum of 5, and I think currently they have 10 listed. So there's plenty of options. And like I said, some of the tests that are listed there, you can order yourself and have somebody else administer them. Others have to be administered by somebody who is certified to do so. And I want to say they get that certification by the company that publishes it. That's my guess. But again, I'm going to have somebody who knows way more about that to talk on that issue. I just want to make sure that I go over the basics before I get into the specific questions that people asked on the board yesterday. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how the student scores. And I addressed this in a previous broadcast. But I know that this time of year, just this extra requirement, if you have a student in grades 3, 5, or 8, just adds a layer of something to do. But I want to assure you that you don't have to worry about how your student scores. A low score does not prevent you from continuing a home education program. A lot of evaluators don't even look at the score. They just verify that the test was taken and the results were obtained. That's all that's required. Other evaluators might consider the test scores when determining whether an appropriate education has occurred, but that's most of them. Even if they are going to look at the test scores, they understand that some kids don't test well. Some kids are stronger in certain subjects, and it's not a barrier to continuing. I've never heard of anybody looking at a low test score and not verifying that an appropriate education has occurred. So I'm just trying to reassure people that how a student performs on a test is really not anything to worry about. In that regard, if you are concerned about how your child will do, even though you have to test or the child has to be tested in grades 3, 5, and 8, you can choose any level of test that you want. You have discretion to do that. So if you have a third grader who might not be as strong in certain subjects, math or reading, you can choose a lower level test. That's perfectly acceptable. If you want to get an idea of where your child is in relation to more advanced kids, you can order a test level that's higher than your child's grade level. So let's talk about, I'll try to answer the questions that some people asked in the group yesterday, and I think they were pretty well covered in the answers, but I might as well hit them. One of the reasons that I'm doing this is to save people a little bit of time. Okay, so one person asked about testing in off years. So, for example, in second grade or sixth grade. In that situation, you're probably not going to have access to a test that requires a certified proctor, but you can order any other test. You can certainly administer it, and if there's no requirement that you include it in the portfolio, but you might have a reason to include it in a portfolio, that's completely discretionary. And you can choose an online test or a paper test. So I think that's answered that question. Another person asked when to test, and they referred to planning out their year, and I'm assuming they planned for their year to end well before June 30th. You can give a test at any time during the year. You can do it at the beginning of the school year or any time. You just want to make sure that the scores, you'll obtain the scores in enough time to include it in a portfolio for the evaluator to just verify that it was in there. And of course, the verification that an appropriate education has occurred is due by June 30th. So you just want to leave enough time for those things to fall in place. Oh, and then I think the same person might have asked whether it counts as a school day. For sure, it does count as a school day. And on that regard, you have complete discretion as to what counts as a school day. If no matter what you do, that you're in charge of what counts toward the instructional time requirement. So for sure, preparation for a test, practice tests, test days, for sure count toward a school day, or I would. I mean, you might not want to count them toward a school day, but I always did. Oh, and okay, and one question, and hopefully this will help answer some other questions that come up about moving into Pennsylvania. Somebody has a 6th grader, and she was wondering when she moves to Pennsylvania whether, or maybe she lives here, she lives here, her student is a 6th grader, and they came from a different state. So she wondered if an evaluator will be looking for results of the 5th grade test, and no. The requirement in Pennsylvania only applies to the current year, and there's no reason for an evaluator to expect to see a 5th grade test result. First of all, the law didn't apply to your student when you were in the other state. So, I don't know of any evaluator who looks back, even to verify that progress is made. Usually the samples in the portfolio show that from the very beginning of the year to the end of the school year. Sometimes there might be reason to look back and say, well, compared to last year or the past few years, has there been progress? But I think that would be an unusual circumstance. You can ask, when I have the person on who's going to be talking about test results, I would be interested to know if she works with families for multiple years, whether she considers that. But legally speaking, there's no reason that an evaluator who's evaluating a student in 6th grade should expect test results from the 5th grade year in the portfolio. That's not legally required. Okay, and then somebody asked if the Keystone graduation requirement applies to homeschoolers, and it doesn't. And then somebody else referred to, and I think she was moving from out of state, she referred to state testing. So I just wanted to clarify that it is a state law, meaning the Pennsylvania homeschool law. The testing requirement is, issued by the legislature, but it doesn't require state testing. You can avail yourself of that. So if you wanted to, and I don't recommend this, but if you wanted to send your student to the local public school to sit for a state test, the law allows that. Like I said, I don't recommend it, but nobody in the state, nobody at the school district sees the test results if you have it done privately. And so I understand what she was saying, but I just wanted to clarify that this is not a state administered or a district administered test unless you choose that. Okay, so hopefully I answered all the questions, and hopefully that helps you. And then I'll notify you when I get the other person on, and we can chat a little bit about the different tests that are available. So anyway, I hope this helped, and we'll see you next time.